June 1944. The hedgerows of Normandy are close and dark, walls of green hiding rifles and mines. A German squad moves along a sunken lane, thinking the high earthen banks will protect them. Then a single deep crack splits the air. Not the hard buzz of an MG-42. A thunderous, heavy note that seems to punch the chest. Red tracers slam through leaves and hedges, and the top of a stone wall explodes into chalk dust. The men drop flat. They know that sound. The Americans call it Ma Deuce, the .50 caliber Browning. And the places that feel safe against rifles and light machine guns are suddenly not safe at all. The American M2 .50 caliber Browning earned this fear the simple way: physics and presence. It threw a half-inch bullet, around 600 to 700 grains, at nearly 3,000 feet per second. That meant a flat path, long reach, and crushing power. Brick, cinder block, car doors, engine blocks, aircraft skin and ribs, wooden bunkers, things that shrugged off ordinary 7.92 millimeter fire could split, spark, or crack under a .50. At a kilometer and beyond, it still hit hard. A man behind a low wall could be hit through the wall. A truck behind a bend could be stopped by shots through the radiator and engine. Even when it could not punch through the front of a tank, it could smash periscopes and sights, tear off external tools, cut wiring, and force the crew to close every hatch. That meant the tank was blinder and slower, and more likely to make mistakes. What made the M2 truly different was not only the bullet. It was how the United States put it everywhere. On the ground, it sat in fixed positions on M3 tripods, guarding road junctions and river crossings. It rode on jeeps and half-tracks. It stood on ring mounts over the turrets of Shermans and tank destroyers. It sprouted on improvised anti-air stands around supply depots, bridges, and convoy halts. One gun could control a tree line at ranges where most German infantry weapons were working at the edge of their ability. American units used it to knock snipers out of church towers, rake hedgerows and windows, and break up ambushes before they started. The sound alone changed moods. Veterans on both sides remembered the shock when it opened up. A rolling boom, thick lines of tracer arcing out, and cover that suddenly felt very thin. German ground forces did not have a true counterpart issued everywhere. Their MG-34 and MG-42 were superb rifle-caliber machine guns. They fired fast, they were deadly, and they shaped the battlefield at the squad level. But they were not built to punch through heavy cover or light armor at long range. The Germans did have 20mm cannons for anti-aircraft use, and these could be used against ground targets with great effect. The problem was weight and scarcity. Those guns were not something every infantry platoon could drag along and set up on a moment's notice. German troops knew the value of a 12.7 to 13mm heavy machine gun. They saw the Soviet DSHK on the Eastern Front. Yet in the West, they had nothing like the M2 in their standard infantry and vehicle formations. In small fights and quick ambushes, this gap mattered. An American Jeep with a .50 could hold down a lane or a field and chew through the kind of cover that Germans trusted. In the air, the .50's mark was unmistakable. U.S. heavy bombers like the B-17G and B-24 bristled with them, 10 to 13 guns in powered turrets and flexible mounts. Their arcs overlapped into hard cones of fire. Early in the air war, German fighters tried tail and beam attacks, lingering behind a formation as they fired. The cost was high. Half-inch rounds ripped fabric, dented armor, shattered glass, and lit fuel. Luftwaffe pilots shifted tactics. They came head-on to spend less time in the guns. They added armor plates. They tried upward-firing cannons that shot into the belly of bombers and even used rockets to break up formations. Even with these changes, daylight attacks on tight U.S. bomber boxes were dangerous. The slow, steady beating of 50s from dozens of aircraft wore down units and crews across 1943 and 1944. Many German pilots learned to respect the warning glow of 50 tracers lacing the sky. American fighters carried the fear forward. P-47 Thunderbolts often had 8 M2s. P-51 Mustangs usually had 6. These were set to converge at a chosen range, creating a dense stream of fire. The ammunition mixed armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer. It was fast and accurate. German fighters used 20 and 30 millimeter cannons that did more damage with each hit. But the American approach was different. A storm of high-velocity rounds that walked across wings and fuselages and fuel tanks. A short burst could shred control surfaces, cut spars, and set fuel lines alight. A turning fight that lingered behind a Mustang could end with a sudden spray of bright dots and a wing tearing free. German pilots learned to avoid long chases and to break off rather than sit inside the range of 6 or 8 Brownings. At sea and along the coasts, the M2 was a workhorse. Landing craft crossed channels with clusters of 50s on rails and pintles, ready to swat low-flying aircraft or fast attack boats. Patrol craft and escorts were crowned with them. During the Normandy landings and the months after, hundreds and thousands of barrels made the low skies around the beaches dangerous. A single German plane diving low could meet curtains of half-inch fire. E-boat crews trying to dash in and launch torpedoes learned that a few seconds in the wrong place could fill the air with sparks and metal. Reliability sealed the weapon's name. John Browning's recoil-operated design in heavy-barrel air-cooled form ran in mud, sand, and cold if crews set headspace and timing right and kept ammunition dry. It did not flatter sloppy work, but it rewarded basic care with steady runs of fire. Troops trusted it. Officers planned around it. The enemy noticed that when the Americans came, the 50 was almost always up and ready. Ammunition types gave the gunner a tool for every job. Armor-piercing could bite into engine blocks. Armor-piercing incendiary could punch and then light fuel. Plain incendiary chewed up aircraft structures and started fires. Tracer let gunners see fall of shot at distance and adjust quickly. The bullet stayed lethal farther than many expected. A burst that looked long could still find a man or a truck that thought it was safe. There was a rumor that added to the chill the weapon spread. Soldiers sometimes said it was illegal to use .50 caliber against people. That was not true. There was no treaty ban on using the M2 against personnel, and U.S. legal officers said so during the war. In practice, troops used it on material and on troops, whenever the situation called for it. But the rumor stuck in some heads, and that made the weapon feel even more fearsome. If something is said to be too terrible to use on people, then being under its fire feels worse. Fear in war comes from what a weapon does and how often it is there. The M2's physics were clear. A big, fast bullet with a long reach. The US made sure it showed up everywhere. German infantry in France and the Low Countries found it on every front line and along every road supply traveled. Luftwaffe pilots met it in the turrets of bombers and in the wings of escorts. Naval and coastal units heard it ring around harbors and convoy routes. Because it was everywhere, it forced changes. Fighter pilots aimed head-on to spend less time under fire. Low-level air attacks became rare and risky. Ambushes on soft-skinned convoys became harder to pull off. Cover that used to stop bullets no longer did. Across the West, from hedgerows to river crossings, the 50's presence pressed on German units day after day. Back in the hedgerows, the German squad lies silent as the dust settles. A jeep sits hull down behind a farm wall. A a single M2 on its pintle swiveling with calm arcs, cutting gaps through leaves. The men listen to the slow, heavy rhythm of the gun and feel the sting of stone fragments on their faces. They think about the distance. They think about the power. They think about how the same sound is on tanks, at roadblocks, on ships offshore, and in the sky above. They crawl backward, not because they lack courage, but because they know the truth that's spread all across the front. When Ma Deuce speaks, normal rules of cover and range no longer apply. July 1944. The lanes bake under a flat sun and stinging flies. The hedges look like iron. On the American side of the same farm wall, the Jeep's gunner pops his head, checks feed, and rips a short burst to trim a slat of wood that blocks his sightline. Splinters fly. He does not need to see men to know where they will be. The bocage teaches everyone to listen and guess. A field has two exits. The Germans will slip to the one with the shade. The Jeep driver eases the nose left until the muzzle just peeks past a milk churn. On the crushed chalk road, brass casings pile near a boot heel. Up the lane, a burst answers, an MG-42 snapping from some low hollow. The Browning replies with 3 long strokes, walking up a hedge face and patting the earth with heavy strikes. Leaves shake loose. A helmet flashes and vanishes. The MG-42 quits. An infantry lieutenant kneels by the Jeep, smudged fatigue collar pinned with damp, rank bars. He does not shout over the gun. He taps the gunner's leg and points to a farmhouse beyond the next bend. The place has seen fights before. Shutters pocked, a balcony post chewed half through. He wants the upstairs room blind before his squad moves. The gunner nods. He lets the barrel cool for a count of 10, swabs it once, and slaps his assistant's sleeve to feed. Then he trims the upper windowsill in deliberate swaths, tacking the lintel, then the corner, then the balcony rail. The balcony gives with a groan and drops. Dust and little stones huff out of the window as rounds pass, punching a line through plaster and lath. When the riflemen dash, they do it with heads down but spines a little straighter. The feeling of a steady hammer at your back helps you cross a place where a man alone would hesitate. Across the ridge to the south, a half-track lurches into a gap and points its turret into the treetops. 4 long barrels track in perfect union. It is an M16 with the quad 50 mount, the meat chopper, and it carries a different sort of comfort. The gunner's boots rest on pedals. He squeezes and the fists of flame climb the branches, clipping leaves into a green snowstorm. A whistle of air and a shadow pass over. The last low FW-190 of the afternoon makes a brave try at a ground attack near St. Lo. It swoops, spitting 20 millimeters, and then it hits the edge of the quad's pattern. Those bullets draw lines that reach, and a handful catch the belly. The fighter rolls with a hard, awkward tuck and is gone behind trees trailing something white. The quad turns back to earth at once. It rakes a tree line where scouts saw felled grouse slip. The effect is not surgical, but it is honest. The strip of brush becomes a place you do not want to be. Night comes fast in these lanes, the sky small and the hedge walls stealing light. Convoys creep anyway because fuel and rations must move. The drivers wear goggles against dust and mustard yellow pollen that never seems to settle. On a 2.5's cab roof, a 50 sits on a pintle, a bandolier of tracer looped on top of ball and AP. The assistant driver stands behind the shield. He is 17 days from stateside dock to Normandy, and he watches the roadside ditches like they are animal eyes. On a hill, a bonfire flashes. It is not a fire, just a farmer's ruin catching flare light. Down in the ditch, a hayrick has a hard edge and silhouette. The gunner tastes metal. He presses the trigger half, let off clean, and lifts a stitch into the mound. The first orange dots mark his error low. He lifts, and the fourth round finds something dry. The hay jumps with a bright core. Figures boil out. 2, 3, 1 tumbling tangled. The convoy does not stop. The gun hammers 3 more bursts until the hay burns bright enough to see that nothing else moves. Then the belt link snaps, and the assistant curses softly and snaps a fresh one in. The road keeps rolling, and the red beads arc and fall and arc again. It is not dramatic, not like in films. It is measured, it is routine, and it keeps men alive. There is a way of using the heavy gun that is ugly and necessary. A prisoner points to a slit of an embrasure in a concrete tooth on a ridge. The squad can hear a voice and an occasional pistol crack inside. Mortars make a good sound on the roof and the sides, but the aperture keeps spitting. A Sherman edges its hull up in a dip, and the commander, bare head under the hatch, counts to calm his breathing. He braces against the cupola ring, sets his elbows, and places the iron ring sight on the slit. He knows his rounds will not dig through the reinforced wall. He also knows a periscope glass is not a wall, and a gunner's eyes are not a wall. He squeezes slow and deliberate, 1 and 2 and 3 rounds, feeling for the pattern of dust that rings the opening. He hears a ping and sees a flash of glass powder spit. He keeps at that edge, digging at the lip, chipping. Inside, the German loader swears, ducks, and covers the breach with his shoulder. The machine gun behind the slit coughs less than not at all. When the infantry rush, the place is not dead. It is just deaf and blind. That is enough. Out in open country, where the bocage gives way to orchard rows and then to wide stubble with telephone poles like black stitches, the 50 turns into a pointer for a hunter with a 1,000-yard leash. There are days after the St. Lo breakout when a gunner lies prone behind a tripod mount, careful of the soft chalk under his elbows, and fires single shots. The gun can be made to do this. He slows his breathing and cycles the spade grips with a hint of pressure, taking up slack. His aim is on a man-sized stone in a field beyond a stream. He cannot see the enemy behind it, but he can see the splash on the upstream face and the chunk that leaves when a bullet hits true. He wants to worry the stone so the man moves. When he moves, a mortar observer has a place to put smoke, and then he. The edge of a stone fence walks down under his sight like teeth knocked out one at a time. The riflemen near him watch, hungry and a little in awe. That distance was the world of artillery and tanks. Here a man behind a beefy gun has a say. Train lines run like veins through the French body, and the US sends P-47s to clot them. The pilots come in at hedgetop height, fat thunderbolts with oil streaks and the taste of cordite from the last pass still in their mouths. They are light on fuel and heavy in options. On one run, the leader holds his rockets for a bridge and gives his wingman the locomotive. The track curves into a cutting. The engine noses out, whistle frozen mid-thought. 6 Brownings per wing speak, and the half-inch lines draw from the plane like taut string. They walk from the tender forward, sparks making a comet tail down the boiler, and then an undercarriage panel blows off and fans into the ditch. A plume of steam blasts up in a column, white and then gray as cinders mix. On the next pass, someone fires API into boxcars, and the luck is bad for the civilians who hid under tarps there, and no one writes that down for the briefing. The job is to starve movement. The guns are a fine tool for the job. When pilots talk later about the things they killed with guns, They talk about trucks and trains and the way fuel drums go up with a polite puff or a dragon breath depending on where the bullets hit. There is a cost to riding behind the big gun. The commander on a Sherman at the outskirts of a village knows his silhouette is a bright sign. He wants the 50 to cover alley mouths and to swat a sniper on a belfry whose single shot has already taken a sergeant. He also knows he is a man from the waist up in a place that hates men high up. He takes a breath, feels the serration of the spade grips under his palms, and stands anyway. He moves like a bird's head, fast start and stop, never lingering where a scope might track him. He puts a half-second rip into the bell tower slit, and then into the apex of a tiled roof where an antenna wire disappears. He drops, counts to 2, and rises again. The sniper's second shot breaks slate near him, but the third never comes. Sometimes the 50 is armor and sometimes it is bait. It is always a decision. North and east, the winter comes. The Ardennes swallows sound with snow and then throws it back with tree bursts. The heavy gun does not love the cold if a crew is sloppy. Lubricants thicken, metal shrinks, fingers slow. The ritual of setting headspace and timing moves from training film to survival skill. A crewman with a gauge on a lanyard, a beanie shoved under a steel pot, works with breath fogging in front of his lips. Go. No go. The clean feel of a bolt finding home. They cycle the feed by hand with mittens off, then blow warmth into their palms and stick hands back into wool. When the ambush comes out of a pine grove with white-cloaked men and a Panzerfaust shooting flames sideways, the gunner's fist drops the butterfly and the first belt runs smooth. Snow leaps in demon shapes in front of crawling men. The driver throws the vehicle into a shallow ditch to cant the mount upward because the enemy is higher, and the gun tracks without complaint. Tracer looks slow at night. It looks like you could catch it. It is not slow. On a river line, the engineers put a Bailey bridge piece by piece under a skin of mortar smoke and fear. The water carries broken tree limbs and little cakes of ice and the sullen plunk of shells that did not explode. On the near bank, 2 M2s on tripods sit behind low earthworks. They are not a secret. They are meant to be seen. Their shields are dented from old fights, folded around them like a theater set flat. The gunners fire every few minutes at a far line of pollarded willows where a machine gun has answered twice today. It is not about killing every enemy. It is about imposing a rhythm. When the Germans opposite think about rushing the far abutment to throw charges or shoot engineers, they measure the distance from the willow to the span and then to the next fold of ground. They imagine the heavy, confident pulses that will rake that space. They look at each other, and they do not go. When German units bring 2 semi-umberton flak guns down to field edges to reply, the fight feels more equal for a minute. Those cannons bite. A half-track caught flat on a track bed sparks and stutters under their touch. But the price for that move is weight and exposure. The barrels are long, the silhouette hard to hide. Often the first clue is the line of cuts in a hedge top, and the second is a burst of dirt 6 feet ahead. The reply comes from a quarter-mile left, where an American half-track had its quad buried in brush with only barrels out. It rakes back in a crisscross. If the flak team lives, it is because a shell from somewhere else lands close enough to change everyone's plans at once. Stories grow in units about how far you can do work with the 50 if you put a man who listens on it. A platoon near the German border swears they broke up an assembly on a hillside more than 1,000 yards off, just by plinking at the slope until men flattened and crawled away. A company transport driver says a single aimed tap into a motorcycle sidecar at dusk made a muffled pop and then silence, and that he forgot about his fear for the next mile. The experiences stack: a cathedral spire losing a stone, a barn door breathing sawdust through seams with every burst, a ditch line held because a gun with no optics on a tripod could still pluck at a man's courage at a distance where he did not expect to be touched. By the time fall turns to winter again, and the bottom of Germany shows its last trench lines and scattered flags, everyone in that fight has a map in his head of what the heavy gun can and cannot do. The men who face it have learned small tricks: a crawl in ditches, a dash under smoke, the use of walls thick and wet and backed with earth. They know that a stone wall alone is no comfort. They know an engine block is better. They know that if the barrel swings away and the gunner slaps a feed cover with that particular metallic clack, they have the shortest clean window of their day. The men who serve it have learned patience. They have learned that 4 good rounds do better work than 40 wild. That a skirt of tracer on top of ball tells a story they can read. That the feel of the grips in snow and in heat is different, but the language is the same. They have learned to tuck the butt of the receiver under their chest when they lie prone, and to clamp their elbows to make the weapon settle, to let barrel and mount do their steady job instead of trying to muscle it. Back in the hedgerows where it began for these men, the paths are wider now from tank tracks, and the banks are cracked open in places. A different German squad drifts along a lane with the same care and the same hopes. The war has moved past them and over them, and they are still in this green tunnel that feels like a coffin. They hear one shot at long range, and they do not know if it is a rifle or not. The second shot, and they know. It is heavy in a way a man feels through his ankles in the dirt. A leaf on a branch 200 yards out jumps and falls. A third shot chips a stone in a low wall. They are not in danger yet, not if they do not make certain moves. They go slow. They try to be not where a man with a heavy gun thinks they will be. A boy no more than 19 licks his lip and tastes dust and old sweat. He wishes for another way through this country that is all angles and gun lines. He thinks he hears the sound on a beach he saw once in training films, and in the air above a bomber his cousin feared, and on a river crossing where a bridge grew under chalk dust, and he wonders how so much of his world found the same note. March 1945. The river runs cold and black and too wide for courage to cross alone. The banks smell of cordite and wet rope. Engineers whisper and grunt under smoke that slinks and tears in a faint breeze. WWIIs nose into the water like cattle, their drivers glancing left and right where tracer ants crawl low over the surface from each shore. On the near bank, 2 M2s sit low, legs dug deep into damp earth, T&I cranked to known stakes. The gunners have tied rags to aiming posts in the afternoon and paced off distances to the willow, the stone, the split in the far levee. Now they talk with their hands on the knobs, left 2 clicks, elevate a hair, and when a motor sputters and a swimmer's head shows like a drowned hat, a burst hits the water with a flat clap. Water behaves like soft earth under a 50. The rounds hammer a small patch into a boiling circle, and the man does not rise again. On the far side, a flare coughs up and pops. An enemy machine gun tries to sneak its voice into the space between the heavy notes. It finds no rhythm. One of the guns on the bank drags a comb of fire across the machine gun's suspected nest, and the nest goes quiet. You cannot cut a tree down with a 50 from a distance, not quickly, but you can strip a bank of brush into nervous hair. At the Remagen Bridge, the world narrows to planks and girders and the sensation of height. German sappers have tried to blind the path with smoke and blast. A Sherman sits hull down behind a tangle of iron. The commander leans into the ring and stares past the front sight into the lattice of steel. He can see men through gaps, their coats dark, their motion frantic. He is not supposed to be a sniper, but he makes himself one by how he thinks about where steel meets flesh. He presses, and the gun eats, and small sparks show where bullets kiss metal and yaw into open air. Someone on the far span throws himself flat and crawls, leaving a dark trail like wet paint. A U.S. lieutenant on the plank line puts 2 fingers in the air and points to a crossbeam where a rope looks wrong. The Browning's owner nods and chews that spot until the rope leaps and whips into the wind. The bridge holds long enough, and that is all anyone asks it to do. In Cologne, the stone lies in hills inside buildings. The streets are lanes with walls of broken rooms. The tankers roll slow, and the men in the hatches feel the way sight lines intersect in their bones. A sniper fired from the 3rd window on the left of the 2nd floor of a building painted once in yellow, and a minute later he fired from a hole that used to be a wardrobe on the right. He is clever. The answer is not a hunt with rifles over open ground. It is the measured wrath of a half-inch that does not ask doors for permission. The tank commander rises up again and throws 3 bursts into the exact spaces the shots came from, then 2 more around them to punish air. He does not have to hit the man to do the work. He has to make the man stop thinking about shooting. Plaster dust drifts out the windows into the street like big ash. When the tank noses forward to the intersection, a 2nd gun, jeep-mounted, covers the cross street by dragging its sight at waist height from wall to wall, the way a broom moves under a table. This is not artistry. It is craft. A day later, the same crew learns the uglier lesson that the heavy gun is a living thing under heat. They have held a corner against a half platoon trying to flank under smoke. The barrel is bright with use. The air above it has the swim of a road in summer. The gunner eases off, counts his breaths, and tests the trigger, and the gun goes on. Runaway. It is a thing of training and fear. The belt snakes and the bullets leave without permission. The gunner does not try to grab the muzzle. He palms the top cover with a flat slap to keep his fingers, leans into the receiver, twists the belt hard, and the assistant drops the feed with a jerk. The last 3 rounds spit, and then the gun sighs into stillness. They swap the barrel, check with numb motions the way men check if their house door is locked when they know it is. Headspace set, timing right. The next burst is under a finger again, and not a force of nature. The corner stays with them. In the air, the last fast things come and go in a blink. They have the clean shark lines of jets and a noise that is new. A Mustang pilot sits light in his seat and watches a thin gray runway cut through scrub, his throttle hand easy. He knows the jets are arrows that do not like to turn, that their engines are hungry for air they do not get at low speed. He waits exactly where they must be slow and gives them the same old answer. 6 guns lick the sky and throw a ragged fence up the glide path. The jet arrives too quick and too proud. Its wing takes the first bites and then its tail. The pilot bails and spreads in the air like a starfish, his canopy whipping away. The Mustang's owner turns his head and is already looking for something else. Smoke from a train, a truck glitter on a road. The things his guns hate multiply under his wings. On a North German farm, the same gun speaks in another language one afternoon, and the sound turns a few American heads wrong. The slow boom is the same, but the rhythm has an accent. An MG team hunkers under a barn eave and listens to the voice of their own machine coming from a hayloft opposite. The Germans have pried a 50 out of a wrecked half-track and fed it with a belt of trophy rounds. It is uglier than the slick muzzle of their own kit. The barrel seems too thick, the spade grips comical, the shield dented. It is an insult that it is theirs now, a parody of American confidence. The first burst shreds the edge of a corn crib where an American engineer had his elbow. The reply is faster than justice. A tank's coax and a bar talk, and then a precise thread of half-inch reaches back and plucks the loft down. The captured heavy gun falls with a sweet, stupid clatter down into straw. For an hour after, every man who heard it keeps hearing ghosts of the same note in any sudden noise. There is a stretch of two-lane where convoys never stop, not for chickens or an old woman bent at the waist in the road, not for anything that looks like pity. A boat-tail car lies nose first in a ditch, and a small group of men in field gray hunch behind it, with a tube that looks like a stovepipe. The convoy's first vehicle blats a short beep, and the second knows by magic old as battle to drift the opposite shoulder. The gun on the third truck opens without waiting for permission from a higher voice. 10 rounds into the car, low. Then a walk up the windshield into the hood until the radiator pukes steam and the tube falls and rolls. A man tries to stand, and the fourth truck's gun helps him change his mind about the direction he is facing. No medals, no speeches. The road does not slow. When the fight slides to the North German plain and then to the Elbe, the heavy gun becomes a guardian of routine. At a ferry point, a battalion kitchen's tent smells of coffee and spoons hitting enamel. A gun on a tripod at the edge of the brush fires 1 round every few minutes at a stump. It is not hitting a man. It is telling anyone listening what will happen if they forget the lesson men have been learning since hedgerows. The man on the spade grips is older than he was, and his assistant has learned to feed without pinching his fingers on links. They talk about nothing. A dance hall in Iowa, a river not this one, cigarettes that taste of rope now. Their gun looks like an iron animal sleeping with its head on its paws. Night now is not a blanket thrown over, panic. It is a place where routine lives. A rifle company that used to tense at every creek on a foxhole lip and imagine panzer ghosts learns to trust that sound. The heavy gun on the flank throws a mark across a field every so often at a precise height. It is grazing fire, and it is not luck. The T&E keeps the bore at waist height at a distance the lieutenant measured at dusk. Anything that tries to crawl will hear it whip a foot over their backs. Anything that tries to run will meet it with speed. This is not art. It is math and hands that know the feel of the wheel. The men who carry the gun learn its small madnesses too. They learn that it likes clean links and hates damp belts. They learn to shake the ammo cans to feel if the belt lies flat or has kinks that will catch. They learn the weight of a spare barrel slung against a hip and the way their shoulder pulls after an hour of feeding in cold rain. They learn to keep a mitten on the right hand and bare the left to feel the trigger. They learn to jam a wedge under a tripod leg to take wobble out and to tell with fingers on the receiver when a round seats short. They learn a kind of love that is not romance. It is trust. The Germans, for their part, make maps of danger out of what they hear. A Feldwebel takes 3 boys aside behind a shed and maps a lane with his finger in dust. He points to places you do not step because the heavy gun on the opposite bank will see a puff of chalk and think of you. He points to a culvert that is a friend. He points to a cow that is not a cow because the barrels behind it peep through canvas slits. He tells them to put their heads low when they hear the heavy sound and not to fight the urge to make themselves smaller. He does not mention courage. He mentions habits. When it ends, it does not end with the last burst. It ends in a town square with a truck full of belts and a crew unlinked them by hand. A boring job of tug and twist and steel smell. It ends with a gunner laying the barrel on a crate and touching it with a knuckle to see if it is safe. And it ends with a motor pool sergeant marking a list with a pencil. The kind of pencil you lick to make it darker. It ends with a German boy, 19, the same one from the lane, sitting on a curb and watching an American clean carbon off a bolt with a brush. The boy's eyes follow the brush back and forth. He hears the big sound still in his chest, and he sees now that the thing that made it is just a box and a tube and a man's hands. It does not make the sound any less. It makes it more honest. He watches the American pick at a bit of grit in the T-slot with a nail, grumble at it, blow, wipe. The American looks up and nods once, like men do when they are tired, and the day is not about hate anymore. The boy nods back and looks at the gun again, and understands that the note he heard across beaches and fields and rivers came from work. Afterwards, there are arguments in buildings with chalk on the floor and folding chairs about what made what happen. Tanks get a share and planes get a share and luck gets a big slice. The heavy gun sits on a bench outside and rusts in the night damp unless someone wipes it down. The men who had it in their charge go home with a new way of listening. A truck backfire makes them freeze a heartbeat, then go on. A nail gun on a roof makes a private who is now a mechanic look up twice before getting back to the carburetor. When a Cadillac passes and its hood knocks, a man touches his thigh, where a hot link once slapped and smiles for no reason anyone else can see. The maps of danger fade and other maps take their place. But in some lanes, in some fields, when the wind is right, there is still a sound like a hard fist falling in slow rhythm. And if you hear it, you will duck without thinking. A body memory of physics and presence that made fields shorter and walls thinner and days longer until the world went quiet again. May 1945. The rain in the hills is soft and mean, soaking canvas and the wool under it, and everything smells like mud and mild relief. Men stack ammo cans in pyramids under tarps and scrawl unit numbers on them with grease pencil. The big guns come off mounts for a day and sit on blankets while crews wipe carbon out of corners with the devotion of men who do not yet know if they will be asked to use them again next week on another shore. Orders shift on clipboards. Some outfits turn in their extra barrels and go to parades with rifles. Some get new tags that say they are going to ships and then to new islands with names like Okinawa and Ieshima, and not one man says out loud what he thinks about that. On a coral spit east of Naha, a line of LVTs rides the lip of the surf, their noses digging, their backs stacked with jerry cans and men under ponchos. The sea is a mirror cut by rain, and the guns on the rail mounts sit up like dogs scenting. The first kick is a shadow in spray, then another, and then a plane comes out of the gray, low and fast with rising flame in its belly. The world walks toward it without moving. Every mount wakes. Twinned 50s on the four tubs of patrol craft, and the single guns on amphibious tractors throw up threads and crossing nets. The 20mm talk deeper and steadier. The 40s slap like big doors. The half-inch is a snarl close in. The plane hits the edge of the web and pieces come off. A flap, then a strip of skin that flutters like a ribbon. It claws down and clips the water with a wing and becomes spray and floating paper and a piece of a man's glove. There are no cheers. The boats keep coming, and the guns shim, pivot, reset, as if they are breathing. In a gorge behind a sugarcane field, caves breathe fire and then silence, and Marines learn a new way to use a heavy gun against a wound in a hill. You cannot shoot a cave to death, but you can make its mouth a bad place to be. Two men drag a tripod up a goat path with a bitter slope, thighs screaming, and the gun follows in, a tarp sling. The loader's hands are raw where the lynx have chewed them. They set the legs wide, kick stones under a foot to take the wobble out, and turn the mechanism until the bore rests just above the lip of the black. The first burst scuffs edge and rock dust billows out in a cough. The second and third cut the lip to flakes. A flamethrower team waits like cats below, counting under their breath. When they go under a roof of heavy fire that chips and chips. The cave answers with a long burst, and then nothing more forever. Far north above the islands, the sky goes on forever and glows at night like a city turned inside out. B-29s climb, their bellies bloated with cans they intend to drop into a grid of streets. Their turrets hold remote 50s, little steel beehives with gyros and sights that tell gunners where to put their hands. At first, they bristle like hedgehogs and sweat under the press of defending fighters. The half-inch reaches out and saws wings and smokes radials, and men in plexiglass blisters learn to watch for the tiny glitter that is a plane rolling in from the sun. Then the air above the islands thins of enemy aircraft, and weight becomes the new god. Turrets come off for some, guns go quiet except at the tail, and space is given to drums of fire. The men who still sit behind sights feel naked, but the rails and hills below burn anyway. When it ends on that side of the world, some gunners come home with time on their hands and a coin in their pocket that means they used to sit where the air tasted like heated aluminum and cordite. The heavy gun does not go to sleep. It does what it has always done. It waits where people will need weight and reach. Summer turns, years click, and then a winter arrives with a new map and old hills. The peninsula is all gullies and ridges and pines that do not mind the cold. The first weeks on the Naktong taste like dust. The last weeks at the reservoir taste like iron and battery acid. Every trick a crew learned with frost on a foxhole lip comes back doubled. Oil that was sticky in the Ardennes becomes glue. Fingers split at the nails and bleed into glove wool, and no one stops because the gauge still has to touch the right places and the bolt still needs to seat. The gun is heavy on a man's back for 50 skidding steps up a cut bank, and it is lighter only when it is locked into a low mount with sandbags hugging its legs and the world opens into a shallow bowl of frozen ground and white air. When the sound comes out of the trees, it is not a single voice. It is 1,000 boot soles and the creak of straps and the rattling click of metal on metal, and then a whistle you do not want to hear. The first men are pale blurs on snow. The big guns on the line do not look like precision weapons from a distance, but a man who knows them can brush a slope from left to right so even, so unbroken, that someone watching would think a machine is doing it for him. The tracer here is a darker, color, angry red, turned wine by cold air and night, and it walks flat at chest height because someone measured before dusk and spun the wheels on the mount until the number in his head matched the angle in his hands. The first wave stumbles and folds. The second thins and runs low and tries to use bodies for ground. The men behind the grinders pause only to swap barrel and glove, to taste the copper in their mouth and ignore it, to slap a feed cover back down with a flat hand that does not stick to the metal because someone warmed the latch with breath a minute before. The gun will not stop unless a man lets it. The night is long and full of bright lines and breaking wood, and the sound of men shouting at men who cannot hear anyone over the beating. Daylight in those hills adds distance. Ridges offer targets that are not men. A rock the size of a stove behind which a phone line runner waits. A scrap of roofing jammed into a cleft to make a false cave mouth. A box on a sled that could be ammo or food. The half-inch does not care which. It makes decisions for distance. A gun on a high-track cover checks range with an eye and puts 4 measured taps into a sled until it jumps and sheds black beads that could be rice or cartridges. A commander on an M26 lets 4 rounds go into a pine stand until flakes of bark snow out and a rifle's muzzle flash that winks at him stops winking. This is where reach is a character. The gun answers problems you cannot walk to yet. Up in the cold blue, something silver with swept wings and a nose like a dart flies with a proud, lazy step. It chases and is chased by a plane with angles that look harder. The old argument returns in new shape. Little fast bullets against fewer heavy ones. The men in the American jet have 6 of the old friends in their roots, but they are tuned for speed now and feed like anger. 3 figures per minute each, and then some. The sight in the cockpit tells a story in inches and lead, and the pilot learns to lay the stream not where the enemy is, but where he will be after the blink. When they hit in streaks. The metal peels from a wing or a tail explodes into pieces the size of plates. The men who swear by cannons swear louder. The men who learn to make lines across a sky say nothing and fly home and check their gun cams and do the math with a pencil and a cup of coffee that tastes like burnt rope. The argument will go on after they are gray. The gun finds itself on perimeter towers where mud fields drown shoes and the night smells like wood smoke and new cement. Its owner sits in a sheet metal chair and turns it slowly from wire to river to wire, holding the grips like wrists. Below, a floodlight makes a cone in fog. He aims into the black outside the cone, not into the light like a new man with a flashlight would. When something does move out there, it is not a man at first. It is a sound that is too round. A boat bottom. The first burst is a quick rake across water, and then you do not see the boat so much as feel that something is suddenly less about to happen. Years grind again. The gun changes clothes, not bones. It perches in a shallow cupola on top of an armored box that swims through rice like a slow fish. The jungle crowds close. Leaves spit sap and light when rounds pass. There is no hedgerow now, just bamboo that acts like stubborn wet bones and hooch walls that are straw and clay. The heavy bullet does what it did to plaster and lath. It refuses false promises from thin walls. A crew chief on a track learns to press and lift, because the gun will melt into madness if he leans on it too long under a sun that boils eyes. On a river that is brown and heartbreakingly calm until it is not, a small boat with a turret of twin 50s rides low. Its gunners barefoot and grinning because your toes tell you more about your balance than boots. They cut wakes into ripples when they sweep banks because you do not give anyone the same clear surface to aim on twice. When ambush comes from a green wall, the answer is an arc that starts at the mud line and climbs to the tree fringe, and the curve of it is muscle memory more than order. Brass casings splash into water and spin for a second on the surface, and then wander down into silt to wait 100 years. On roads with numbers that are rumors more than maps, trucks turn into small fortresses. The guns above their cabs wear hand-painted names. Men bolt plates to sides and build boxes around mounts with the energy of beavers. Now a convoy is not a row of prey. It is a chain of predators with eyes that look both ways at once. When the kill zone lights, the big voices speak first. Aim low into the grill of a blockaded bus, and then up through glass and headliner, because that is where wires run and triggers hide. Strike at the base of a banana grove, where the stalks are thick, and then take 2 breaths and go again. A gunner learns to taste the belt for kinks with fingertips before he slaps it into the feed. He learns to listen for the shallow change in pitch that is a tell of a link not playing nice. He learns, again, that the way you hold the spade grips matters more than what you say about courage in a bar. The same rumor about what is allowed and what is not floats in the heat and the rain there as it floated in the hedges and the snow. It never mattered much then, and it does not now. There are trucks to keep rolling and friends behind you walking who should not be asked to trust thin walls anymore. Somewhere a staff man makes notes in a neat hand about calibers and targets, and letters go up and down channels, and the men at the mounts keep doing their careful work. Time does its slow carpentry. The heavy guns you could build a porch with sit behind glass in some places, with cards that name them in tidy fonts. In other places, they lean against sandbags under sun that hates men and watches. You can still hear their note wherever a belt meets a feed pole and a bolt makes the trip, if you have stood in the same place once. A kid in a ball cap listening to a veteran talk at a range hears more than words. He hears the pauses. He sees how the veteran's hands are square on nothing when he explains how you never jam the cover into place but lower it, because speed is slower when it breaks something. He sees a smile that has nothing to do with fun when the man says, "Light, just a lick," and then a breath, because patience piled up becomes survival. If you walk a lane in France today, where roots still hold a bank up and you put your hand on a gnarled trunk, you can find a smooth oval where bark healed around old hurt. Not a man alive who did it is there to tell you their names. But some steel made that in a second and went on. In a city where the stone is new inside old fronts, if you stand under a window and look up and see a ripple in plaster where there should be square, it is a small footprint. On a dock that was rebuilt twice between wars, in a country far from the hedges, a bollard has a crescent missing at waist height that never quite took paint the same again. That is a memory of a gun on a Jeep that paused there for an afternoon in a year when everyone was 19. The gun itself is not romantic and it is not noble. It is a tool that tells the truth very far away. The men who carried it and the men who lay flat when it talked were the ones who made the rest of the story. The sound that it made connected fields and streets and decks and runways in a line that men walked until they were done walking. When you close your eyes, if you have heard it, you can still mark distance by it without needing a map. And sometimes, standing in a soft night with your hands empty, you realize you are breathing in time to a rhythm you learned long ago without knowing you were learning anything at all. October 1990. The desert holds light differently than France. It lays it flat like a sheet of tin. In assembly areas behind miles of sand berms, crews uncrate old friends with sun-bleached paint and fresh stamps. The men who teach the young ones to set headspace and timing do it with the same stubborn ritual, now with hands chalked by talc-fine dust instead of chalk from chalk. They talk about thermal mirage and how a sight picture swims at noon, about the way the big gun's trace looks weak in the brightest hours and then suddenly very bright at dusk. They learn to lay long lines across nothing, to draw fences in air to keep a night raid honest. On WWIIs with ring mounts, canvas tied tight against the wind, the half-inch sits higher than it did on Jeeps, but the reach is the same. Convoy commanders mark one truck every few vehicles as a stopper. and those trucks run with belts mixed to eat glass, radiator, and then will. In briefings, the ROE get a voice. At the gun, the physics do. January 1991. The ground fight is a sprint that feels like a long breath you hold for days. Tanks run like houses at a gallop, and Bradleys plow still air into sheets. The 50s on tanks are eyes and fists at once. In the first hours after the line moves, a night-scared truck in the wrong place becomes a lesson. 2 taps at the grill and 1 at the driver's side. No one inside wants to stay. The emptiness of the land hides nothing. A recce team parks in a fold and uses the gun like a pencil, indicating strong points 2 kilometers on by walking a neat dotted line to them. A flight of Apaches watches those dots with green eyes and nods into their helmets. The days that follow smell of hot oil and static, and at night the big guns make flat, low thunder into alleys of sand where a man behind a shovel cannot see a thing until his shovel dances in his hands from shock. April 1993. There is a city by the sea that looks easy at noon and eats the unwary in the afternoon. The Humvees that roll there sprout armor like barnacles and prey in rings. Every corner is a maze of sightlines. The DSHK answers from a rooftop now and then, and the old conversation travels a block. Heavy caliber against heavy caliber in lanes where sound stacks. American gunners learn to slice corners low, to let a pattern climb up concrete and bring brick with it. Lean too long and someone with a tube answers. The spade grips bruised palms through gloves. When a helicopter staggers back toward the airstrip with holes in a tail boom and men hanging their heads out to see if the world is still there behind them. The escort ships, boat hard with twin mounts up front, stitch water in front of skiffs that sprint and then stall. The skiff's drivers see the tidy row of splashes walk toward them, and they feel the old lesson bloom in their bones. They turn away. March 2003. The road again, the same road, miles of it, new faces. The names on the guns are painted with younger hands, the jokes the same. The 50 sits amid sandbags on turret rings with shields that look like folded pizza boxes. You ride high enough to count windows and low enough to smell burned clutch. In cities, the gun learns a new habit. It becomes a surgeon of engines. A white sedan that moves too fast into a checkpoint meets the rule the battalion hammered into every head. Glass first if you must, but metal before that. The gunner lays a short pulse across the hood. The engine coughs its lungs out onto the street, fluids steaming like breath. The sedan coasts to a stop that feels gentle in the way a near accident feels. Men in the car throw their hands up to make plain their mistake. A different car on a different day keeps coming with its back end too heavy. The bursts start sooner and lower, and for a long time the street smells of pennies and melted tire. By summer, the enemy learns to hide bombs under roads and in dead dogs and inside cinderblock corners. The big gun adds another trade to its old ones. It becomes a way to poke dangerous things from a distance. The word detonate is used the way you say knock now. If a roadside mound looks wrong, a burst into its face tells you more than staring ever could. In the heat shimmer, a thermal optic paints engine blocks as white suns. A gunner on a remote station, hands on a joystick, sits down behind ballistic glass and watches a flat screen as if it were a pond at dusk. He moves his thumb and tiny reticles step. The mount on the roof above him obeys, purring. It is an old voice leaving a new throat. He misses the smell, a little, but not the way exposure felt on his collarbone. The trade-off is simple. He is alive. The target at the other end does not care who held the grip. It meets the same end. November 2004. The city by the river is a grid of courtyards and roof fights. Teams drag tripod and receiver upstairs that were built to carry children and sugar sacks. A single gun in the right place changes a block's rules. Drop it on a roof, bag sand around legs, string belts in a lazy S so they will not snag, and suddenly the courtyards below become watched space. An enemy with a rifle behind a parapet thinks in stones and slabs. The half-inch teaches him to think in angles and depth. A brick half-wall that kept cousins safe for generations is a poor cousin in this new family. When Marines cross a lane, they do it in time with measured beats that cut a parapet into chips and make hands duck down at the wrong time. The burst is not long. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be sure. Afternoons in those months taste like dust and metal and something bitter no one will name. At night, the heavy flash used to betray the mount. The newer barrels wear teeth at their mouths. The flash breaks into smaller things, less likely to brag to an enemy eye. The quick change barrel and fixed headspace make a crew's ritual shorter. A gunner who learned on films where a gauge on a lanyard was gospel now reaches for a different truth. Twist, drop, lock, no feeler. He trusts the parts because they have been taught to trust one another. He still checks with habit's fingers because old habits save men. High ground comes back in a new country with mountains that look like the bones of the world. The air is thin and hard and smells of stone. Sitting on a ridge that watches a village 2 ridgelines away, a team sets up the big gun as if they are building furniture on a breezy porch. Sandbags under legs, a wedge under a foot to take the bounce away. A thermal box whispers pictures. There is no noise until there is. A white glow slips fast from boulder to boulder. The first burst lands behind him on purpose. You do not have to hit a man to take his day away when the whistle of bullets cuts his ears and the rock next to his head spits shards that feel like bees. The ridge breathes and then goes still again. A minute later, someone on the team eats a dried fig and says nothing. Down in the valley, helicopters eat dust and throw it back out in hoops. Door guns are 50s more often now, and the voice from the cabin is still the same voice, only faster. Gunner leans into a bungee and paints a draw with short strokes. He has learned to say enough and not more. On a dark run to a mountain base, a pale pickup starts across a wadi at a dumb time. The crew chief calls it. The pilot says clear. The 50 says no, not this time. The truck rolls to a stop with its block hold and its bed bouncing with loose farm tools. The crew drops a chem light and flies on. The big gun does work, and the night forgets it immediately. At sea again, on a crowded little war, the half-inch reads water like a book. A fast skiff points straight at a gray hull and holds nerve. The warning ladder climbs as it is supposed to. Radio, horn, light, flare. Then the water in front of the skiff starts to kick up, neat dots that get closer at a measured pace. You do not shoot the man. You shoot his path and his engine and his confidence. It is a language even young men in sandals learn fast. The skiff veers. The line of neat dots stops. The sea flattens again, offended and then over it. There are quieter days when what matters is keeping a friend alive who is holding a wire on a wall. Perimeter towers do what towers have done since the first fence was put up. A gunner sits in shade and turns a slow sector, counting imaginary seconds between checks. He knows where the ditch runs and where a goat track crosses and where a stand of reeds hides a thing that might be a young tree or a man crouched low. At night, he toes the trigger to drop a single tracing round at pre-measured height across a field, a fence of light to remind people from both sides that habit keeps a lot of men out of holes in the ground. 20 minutes later, he does it again because men forget quickly in the dark. The old rumor about what is allowed follows them here the way a stray dog follows a mess tent. But the talk now is rules of engagement written with nested sub-paragraphs and laminated cards. The heavy gun's place in that is simple and strict. Shoot what threatens the people you are responsible for. What it hits understands the rule very clearly. On a day when a small car tries to change the math outside a stadium at release time, the long belt sings for less than a second, and the car's hood looks like lace. Parents with children in hands do not stop. They are shepherded along by men whose hands shake later. After, you walk around and look at what the rounds did to steel that was not very good steel to begin with. And you nod because vivid proof is part of memory. Even in fights that are more watching than shooting, the big gun's presence shapes ours. A patrol steps through an alley that is more holes than wall. Up above on a roof, a man behind an optic on a remote station watches the world in grayscale on a screen. His hands are light on sticks. A dog pads along a parapet. A boy rides by on a bicycle with legs too short for the pedals. A truck with no plates and a sag in the trunk starts to come up the block. The crosshair finds the crease where hood meets fender. The truck pauses. The driver stares into the pale eye on the roof without seeing the man behind it. He backs up. The patrol keeps moving. Everyone's heart rate returns to something like normal. No one writes that down either. Years later, after a rotation ends and then another, the big guns sit for a week on racks. Their steel gone dull with the fingerprint fog of hands that needed to handle them but did not love the smell. A young armorer wipes them down, puts cards on them. M2HB, M2A1, the dates they were born when his grandfather was a boy. He knows the trick of seating a top cover with grace, the weight of a bolt in one hand, the way a feed tray cover catches at one corner if you are too proud. He stands behind one on a range that sits in heat haze, and he teaches a row of faces to lean in to recoil and not to flinch at their own noise. There are roads again, in places where the dust is a different red and the smell is eucalyptus. Boats again, on a river that carries logs bigger than cars. A fence again, this one chain link and high, with coils that shine mean at the top. The 50 goes where people build lines and want to keep them. It has been dressed in black and in green and in tan. It has been given new clothes, new mounts, new eyes. But if you strip the bolt and run your finger over where the steel has polished itself under thousands of cycles, it feels the same under skin as it did when Spade grips first met ribbed leather gloves. That familiarity is why old men smile when they see one, and why men who faced it once catch their breath for a second when a car backfires in a narrow street. If you listen hard in a museum where an example sits behind rope, you can almost hear it breathe. Not the gun, exactly. The stories it pulled along behind it. The fields and roofs and decks it tied together. A guide says a date and a name and a count of rounds per minute. A child looks at the thick barrel and asks if it is heavy. The guide says yes because that is what you say. The child cannot know that weight was the point. Not just the pounds of steel, but the weight it put on decisions. The weight it put on a lane or a river mouth or a ridge at 3 a.m. The weight that made a man crawl backwards slowly, thinking not about courage, but about angles and time. And so, in quiet places, the rhythm sticks. A man fixing a fence hums something and doesn't know why the beat goes in threes. Somewhere else, a finger taps a tabletop slowly, as if testing a trigger under a cover. The things the big gun did not end with the guns going to racks or glass. The lanes it made short stayed short in memory. The walls that felt thin never quite grew thick again. In the dark, in 100 cities and fields, the idea that a long line can reach you from far away lives on. You breathe, and without meaning to, you count to 10 as a barrel cools, and then you go back to work, because that was always the way.